So, I'm going to make a video about my theory because I haven't really done very much on that. I mean, here and there, little disparate pieces and all that, but I've never really gotten into like the actual theory itself. So, the actual theory, the very first thing that I had tried to focus on was cosmology and ontology. And I didn't really see them as being any different, honestly. If you know one, you should be able to know the other, in the fundamental sense. If I know where everything came from, and I know when it all happened, I should also be able to derive from that a causal explanation of how and why it happened. If you look at just basic Aristotelian logic, if I know what the origin of an event or an effect is, if I know what the origin of an effect is, I can derive the cause of that effect. So if we apply that to existence, then we ask the question, where did it all come from? So then there's a lot going on there that most people don't recognize when they ask that question. It seems simplistic, like most questions seem to be simplistic. But simple questions often have very complex answers because there's stuff that's embedded or implied in the framework or the context of the question that the question itself doesn't address. It assumes that it's already the case. And some of that is necessary because if I didn't assume anything, then I wouldn't have any way of orienting myself in the world because I'm not born with a perfect clarity of what everything is and what everything isn't. And no one ever has been and no one ever will be, because a definition of a thing and the thing that's being defined can't ever be the same thing. If my name is me, then misspelling my name would kill me, or something like that. It obviously isn't the same thing, and to think that it is would be absurd. So there has to be if not a translation error, at the very least a translation in between my name and myself, my descriptor and what's being described. So with cosmology and with existence, with anything and with all things, that's true. Meaning, I can't ever give a perfect description of what something is or isn't, because I can't ever make the description and that thing one. There might be such a description out there that God has access to, but I would garner that whatever description that is would be so vast and lengthy and complex and intricate that it basically would encompass more information than would be able to fit in any single referent. It would basically refer the description. If there is any description of anything that is so perfect that it's absolutely true, like God himself could not find an error with it, kind of a thing. If that really did exist with any truth about anything, then that description would be so vast because it would have to encompass everything else and then describe it also, and then describe those descriptions, because everything is all interconnected and there is no such thing as something in and of itself. God and creation are one. There's not a distinction ultimately between the creator and the creation. Just as there is no real distinction between me and you, there is no distinction between God and creation. In the same way, we can have polar sort of degrees of relation between each other. We can have ratios of influence. We can have more or less of some given attribute that I randomly and arbitrarily decide to use to measure the difference between me and you. But to give you an example of what I'm saying, it sounds crazy, but think about this. Me and you are only ever 6 people apart. If I described everybody that I knew, and then everybody that they knew, and everybody that they knew, and everybody that they knew, it would only take 6 of those to get from me to you. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't even matter if you're on some other part of the globe. As long as you're alive right now, and at the time of me recording this, there's only ever 6 people in between me and you. So there really isn't very much difference. It seems like it's vast. You don't know anything about me. I know that you're alive. I know that you're a human, because if you're currently alive on this planet, humans are the only sentient creatures on it. There's a lot of things that I know about you right off the bat. And this is what I was saying about questions already having things baked into them and assumptions and stuff like that. So that when people ask the question, why do we exist? Or how did everything begin? Or what is the origin of all things? They ask this question naively because they ask it in the sense of it assuming that there is an answer which is all-encompassing. But the problem with that answer is, like I said, it would be infinite, because it would have to describe everything else. If I'm going to describe me and you, then I have to describe those 6 people in between us, and then I have to describe those 6 people's entire entourage of other people that they know. And then I have to do that for every person on the planet. And then I have to do that for their parents and their parents and their parents and their parents, all the way back to the origin of the species, which itself is kind of smeared. What do you mean exactly by human? Do you mean Homo sapiens only, or do you also want to include Homo erectus, Homo, etc., as grouped in? And if you don't, why, and what's the distinguishing factor and the limit? And then you'll start to see these gray areas form all the fucking time. Any description that you apply, it seems airtight until you apply it to a really subtle difference. Like when you start to ask what's the difference between a human and a monkey, and the line gets blurrier and blurrier and blurrier, and you go back and you find there's a common ancestor where they were both the same species. It was the same. They both go rooted back into the same common ancestor, and it's just bizarre to think about. And then you think about all the living things on the planet. Where did they all come from? Well, they all had one common ancestor, so so we know. Maybe they had multiples, because you've got prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and what is the other one? Anakaryotes or something like that? I don't remember. And again, is that the only way that you can describe all life, or is that, again, another arbitrary description? And every single description is arbitrary because it's finite, because it doesn't tell you everything about the thing that you're describing. And if you did, you wouldn't be able to group anything into any group. They'd all be so specific that it would exclude everything except that one single instance of that one single part of that one single thing. And so now we're not even talking about whole entities, we're talking about the properties of those entities being isolated from everything else in existence and considered solely on their own, because the specificity of our descriptions is getting to the point where the description and the thing that's being described are almost the same thing. So when you get that precise, then you end up in this sphere where it's like you've got a description and the thing that's being described as being the same thing, which then how do you get rid of that common ancestor between the thing that's being described and the description itself? The thing that is and the information or facts about it. For example, if we consider nothing and then facts about nothing, those are 2 completely different things, and they obviously can't coexist. And it's the same for any absolute, and then it's also the same for any finite anything. Literally everything and anything. You can't have a description and the thing itself being the same thing. You can have them approach each other, but they can never become each other. And the more that they approach each other, the more disintegrated that thing that you're trying to describe becomes from everything else. When you're vague, and you say vague, giant classes like human or person, that's an even bigger one, person. Because what is a person? A person could also be an animal. If you're an animal rights activist, then you might say that an animal is a person. And, the cow that is feeding you today is a person. or at least it was when it was alive. And does that include dead people? Are dead people persons? Are objects persons? Because you've got, and people think that that's a silly question, but there's animists out there that believe that they are, and I believe that they are. I believe everything is ultimately made out of subjects. And, you could believe whatever you want, but that's the point, is that all these descriptions are all arbitrary. What do you mean by person? What do you mean by human? What do you mean by time? What do you mean by space? What do you mean by origin? What do you mean by everything? Do you mean every rational thing, everything that I personally can know about? Or do you mean everything even beyond the things that I can know about? At which point, how can I measure or even speak about those things? I don't even know what it would be that I would be referring to, because it would be beyond necessarily my conception. So then I can't even name that. And for me to group them all into one set like that when they're obviously completely different things makes sense. Because like when you get to a point where you are so broad and so vast with your classes, where it seems as if the class is the thing that's self-evident, where it's like, well, everything. Well, that just seems like it's so vast that it would be self-evident. Like, well, yeah, I already know what everything is, but really, do you? Because there's so much out there that we don't know about. For example, we've only ever seen 1% of the universe, and that's only 1% of the observable universe. What about the unobservable universe that we necessarily will and can never see, because it's beyond the range of light reaching back to us? The expansion of the universe is so exponentially increasing that there are galaxies that, if they don't already exist, will exist so far away from us that we won't even be able to see them. We won't even be able to see the stars. We won't even be able to see the galaxy itself, because it would take so long for the light to reach back to us that it never makes it, because the expansion is faster than the light. So like, how do you get any information about those places? How can I include that in my so-called set of everything if I don't even know what that is? And then there's other things that are even beyond those. What's beyond that? I mean, hell, we're already talking about imaginary galaxies. Why don't we talk about imaginary things that are beyond that? What if there's unicorns out there? Should I posit that there are, or that there aren't? How can I make any qualitative measure of anything and say anything about anything that I don't know anything about necessarily? So then what the hell is everything? What does that actually mean? And it's sort of like the word universe. What does that mean? Because you've got the observable universe, and then you've got the unobservable universe, beyond the observable universe. We only exist in this little pocket where everything is gratefully clumped together right now so that we can see other stars in the night sky. There will be a day when we can't. There will be a day where even if we exist somewhere, let's say Mars or some other place that doesn't just slam into the sun, and we just keep existing and keep existing and keep existing somehow, maybe in space, in the solar system somewhere, there will be a day where when you look outside, you will not see a single star. It will be absolute blackness and void. And that happens just because of the fact that the expansion of the universe happens everywhere, all the time, and it's exponentially increasing. The longer of a timeline that we give it, the faster it explodes. The faster all this space drifts apart, to the point where light can't even reach it anymore. And you'll start seeing red shifts and shit. And then they'll just dim out and disappear, and you won't see shit anymore. It'll be there, but it's so far away, and it's moving so fast that the light never reaches me. So it's as if it's not there for me, but it does exist. So is that part of everything or not? Is that part of the universe or not? Does it make sense for us to refer to things that we'll never experience as part of our universe or not? So, I mean, these questions really started to fuck with me, and I got into some phases where it was like, okay, what do I do with that? Because if I can't describe anything, and these moments never lasted very long, but I would think, well, then what's the point of describing anything anyway? But then immediately I would recognize, okay, the reason that I need to describe things is so I can function and operate in the world. You can't operate in the world without having any description of anything, where you just like, I'm just taking it all in, man. How do you even say that? How do you even know what that is? You describe it to yourself. You describe to yourself, oh, this is like that. Even when the act of looking, the act of hearing is a narrative, a story that I tell myself about what it is that my eyeballs are interacting with. But how do I describe that? How do I describe red? What is red? I mean, I can describe the wavelength, the nanometer of wavelength of that, frequency of light. Yeah, but then what is light? And more to the point, what is the quintessential essence of redness itself? The quality of seeing that is not the same thing as the wavelength, because the box doesn't see red. Dogs, if they're colorblind, they can't see the color red at all. If all they see is just some grayscale. Some other human might see something completely different than me, but just because of the fact that it's all relative, they see blue and it's all inverted. So like everything that I see is as red is actually the color blue to them, and that's how they experience it. But they just call it red because that's what it always looks like, and they can point at it and say, yeah, that blue color over there in my head that I'm seeing is red, because that's what everybody calls it. It's just a name. It's just an arbitrary name. But as long as you use it consistently, as long as you use it the same way every time, then it doesn't really make any difference what you call it, because it's just some arbitrary description. And so this is what I was getting at, is like, okay, so it's arbitrary, but it's useful because it's consistent. So it's the consistency. It's using it the same way every single time that you use it. And this is what we build trust with other people on, because we can predict what they're going to do based off of how consistent they are. Well, this guy's really consistent. Every single Monday he goes outside and he empties his garbage, so that I can predict that next Monday he's going to be outside emptying his garbage, because he always empties his garbage on Monday, because that's his consistent way of dealing with his garbage. So the consistency of the theory, the consistency of the description is really what matters, the value of it. It's not whether or not it's actually completely, utterly, unequivocally, unquestionably, absolutely God-given true. It's just that it's consistently used so that we can predict what's going to happen next. Now, we can't predict anything perfectly because we don't have perfect descriptions, because the description can't be interchanged with what it's describing, or else they'd be the same thing. And then if they were the same thing, then we wouldn't be able to describe it, because the description would be the thing. So then it would be like self-evident. But we've never seen anything that's actually self-evident, because if there were things that were self-evident, then we wouldn't have the first Declaration of the Independence written by by people that owned slaves and beat their wives, while contending that it was self-evident that all men are created equal. How are all men created equal? How is that self-evident if the person that wrote it was a slave owner? That doesn't make any sense. But to them it did, because to them a man was not the same thing as a woman. It wasn't a human, that all humans were created equal. They didn't believe that. They didn't believe all humans were created equal. Otherwise they wouldn't have owned slaves, and it wouldn't have been an issue, right? They would have just known better and just not owned the slaves. But they did own slaves, and so obviously they didn't think that all humans were created equally. And they didn't think that men were created equally to women. And so when they say man, they don't mean human, they mean male. And they don't just mean any male, they mean white male. And that was so self-evident to them, they didn't even say white male. They just put man. They just put men. And see, that's what happens when you say things are self-evident, is that you smuggle so much in that you don't even recognize that you're smuggling in. And then it's like, oh, well, I guess it's not so self-evident now, is it? And then, so then what good is that description? What good did that really do America by saying all men are we find it self-evident that all men are created equal, and that's why we own slaves and beat our wives and, refuse to raise our daughters as equal to our sons, because all men are created equal. Duh, self-evident. I mean, you know what else is self-evident? That the earth was flat. That's self-evident. But yet, it isn't actually self-evident because it's not actually evident, because it's not actually the case that the earth is flat or that all men are created equal, etc. None of these things are actually self-evident because none of these things are actually true. At least not absolutely, anyway. They all break down. And then the question is, okay, so it's not whether or not they're going to break down, because they all will, because they're finite descriptions of an infinitely complex phenomenon. No matter what you pick, you think things are so simple and so easy to describe. This person's crazy. What the hell is crazy? Try to actually write it down. Crazy is, oh, well, when you do things that don't make sense. What does that mean? Well, makes sense just means it makes sense because it's self-evident. What the fuck does that mean, you crazy-ass person who thinks that it's self-evident that all men are created equal while owning black slaves and beating your wives and raising your daughters as if they're not your sons? I mean, that's what happens when you claim that things are self-evident. Oh, the earth is flat. Well, time is the same everywhere, no matter how fast you're going. Oh, yeah, that's self-evident. It's self-evident that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, except the expansion of the universe. But, that's self-evident. There is no such thing as self-evident. Every single time that we say something is self-evident, what we're doing is we're assuming something, and then we're thinking that that assumption is so safe that we don't even bother questioning it. That's all that means. Now, if I happen to disagree with you, and I say that what you say is self-evident is actually not self-evident, then there's really not much of an argument that you can propose to me, because your argument rests on the case that it is self-evident. So for somebody that doesn't think it's self-evident, the only thing they can do is just throw their hands up in the air and look at you like you're crazy, or call you some name, or resort to some, dismissal of some kind. But they can't engage it, so they have to just dismiss it, because they don't have anything left to say. They don't have anything there to give. They just go, well, and then they leave. Or they go, well, you're a fucking retard, and then they just leave. But they always leave without answering anything further, because they think that's the end. They can't even conceive of something beyond that. That's the limit of their comprehension. So the description is always limited by the limit of the person's comprehension who's describing something, obviously. Well, that's self-evident. But it isn't, though, because there's so many people out there that act like that's not the case. Well, what are you, fucking stupid? Can't you just see this is the case? Obviously. What the fuck? People do that all the damn time. They forget that the stuff that they do is just as equally stupid to somebody else who sees that it's self-evident that they're wrong about something. But they don't think about that because that's beyond the limit of their comprehension. And so they're oddly and ironically shielded and insulated into these little bubbles where the only thing that they can really understand is the very thing that they already accept. And if they choose to continue that, where they just limit everything to what they already know, then they can't learn anything new, and then they just turn into an old grandpa and dismiss everything except what they already know. And that's what most people consider to be an adult in our current society, is a person that dismisses everything except what they already believe. And the reason that I say that is because this is how people interact with each other. If you say something that goes against what somebody already believes, they will just instantaneously and unquestionably dismiss it. They will not ask you any questions about it. They will not be curious about it. They'll actually be quite threatened by it, and they'll act as if the thing that you're saying is so insignificant that it would be rude to even give it credence. And the reason for this is subconscious. It has to deal with evolutionary adaptation, and it also has to deal with just the facts of life, is if I can't predict what's going to happen in the future, then I can't function in the present, because my form doesn't just sustain itself naturally forever. I have to eat, I have to sleep, I have to go to the bathroom, I have to stay away from danger and stay near friends and people that I need to take care of and people that take care of me. And I need to know the difference between those two classes of friends and foes. And I need to know where those people are at and be able to predict where they're going to be and where I'm going to be, so that I can either avoid the foe and pursue the friend, or die. And so it becomes life threatening at that point to know when and where my friends and foes are going to be. And part of life is trying to predict tomorrow, given yesterday. So, what I do today is a direct reflection of what I believe is going to happen to me tomorrow. Because I know I could die tomorrow. So then why bother planning, right? Oh, well, then I'm just going to do whatever the fuck I damn well please. You do that for long enough, you'll end up homeless. You will not have the ability to feed yourself if you follow that. Now, some people could say, well, isn't that what Jesus preached, is to give up all your possessions and follow him? Yes, he did, but he said that that's limited to only people who want to be perfect. And he didn't throw that out there as the first thing. He said that after being questioned about it several times, actually. So that's not what he advocated for everybody to do. That was for a select few that weren't happy with just following the normal Mosaic 10 Commandments. You want to go further than that, you give up all your possessions and you follow him. And so then, and don't plan on anything for tomorrow and all that stuff. And it's a great philosophy, but it's not something that everyone can follow. And we have to be able to discern whether or not we even can do that. Now, if we all did that, and this is why he didn't want everyone to do it, if we all did that, the irony would be that we would all die. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing, because it goes back to not only the evolution of our species, but it goes back to religious fundamental self-evident things that we use unconsciously to measure what someone else is saying. So it's almost ubiquitous that Jesus is considered a holy man, that he's considered a good person, that he's considered a righteous person, a morally good person. Pretty much ubiquitously. Now, you could condemn him if you want. It's just that most people don't, because there's very little meat to pick on that bone. But if you were to have that intent, you could. But it unconsciously doesn't determine, but it unconsciously influences the way that we contextualize things. So that when we say things like, how did everything begin? That's borrowing from the assumption in the Old Testament, which is part of the Bible, within which is the context that Jesus spoke those words. And in the Old Testament, it says that there is a beginning, and in the beginning, God created this void. And that was the first thing that was ever there. There was God, and then the first thing that he did was make this void thing. The earth is what it calls it, and it says the earth was null and void. And that's also what I believe. I believe that there was a void in the beginning. And so then, it sounds like it's so far reaching, but these all are interconnected beliefs. Jesus said he's not here to get rid of the old prophets and prophecies, he's here to fulfill them. And so then he backs up the same story of Genesis that was in the Old Testament. Just because he didn't verbatim say it again, he clearly emphasizes that that's what he believes when he answers the Sadducees and the Pharisees about divorce, and he says, let that which God has put together to remain together, and let no man tear it asunder. If God put them together, you leave them together. You don't rip them apart. That's why it says in the Old Testament that that Eve is one with Adam, that you become one flesh because you're taken from the rib of Adam, which is, admittedly rather silly, but there's a mystical kind of an analogy there, as like we're all part of each other. We're all interconnected with each other. We're all part of one mass of people. Now, going back to that, if everybody decided that they wanted to be like Jesus, and they all wanted to just never plan for anything, then we would not have a civilization. Everything in our civilization would break down. 99% of our population would die very quickly, within months. And that's not because of violence or any kind of morally bankrupted act. It's just that we would all give up all of our possessions and follow Christ. So none of us would have anything. We would not have any possessions. And so then, but then we would all share like in communism. Well, as you can see from history, communism does not work. Communism is the worst form of government that you could possibly have, because what it does is it disincentivizes the very things that it wants to incentivize. The very things that it needs are the things that it destroys every single time, because you can't find it self-evident that all men are created equal. You can't think that every single person out there is just some interchangeable block or some machine. They're not machines. They're not interchangeable. Every person is unique. Every person has their own role. That's why Christ makes this distinction between those who want to be perfect and give up all their possessions and follow him, and those that don't and weren't supposed to, so that they can support those who do, or so that they can live their lives however they wish. But if everybody gave up all their possessions and everybody was quote unquote sharing everything, no one would bother going to work. And it doesn't follow logically that we enslave each other and make each other go to work when we don't want to, because we know we won't want to. And if we don't have to and we don't want to and there's no one there to make us, then we just won't, because there's no point in doing it. I mean, you might do some work sometimes, like around your house, for example. Maybe you wanted to farm for your family. You'll work for your own family, sure. But you're not going to be compelled to work for some stranger that you've never met. And so then we can't build these gigantic civilizations of strangers, because that's how our modern society operates. Is we operate in a civilization where 99% of the labor that we are performing are for strangers who we have no connection with and are completely, don't give a fuck about us as a person. They care about our role. They care about that job being done, but they don't care about you doing the job. They just care about the job being completed. It doesn't matter to them whether it was completed by you or somebody else. As long as it was completed, it's completed. As long as it's completed well and within all the parameters that they would find adequate, then they don't care who did it. And that's good, because that gives us the chance to be a meritocracy, where if I work harder than you, well then now they would rather have me there. But again, that just shows like you can't have an economy where everybody's treated equally. You can't have an economy where everybody loves each other the way that Jesus loved his disciples. You can't have a world where every single person in there would die for their friend, because we would all be dead, unfortunately, if that were the case. It sucks. It sucks to say it, but it's just a fact. If we are not going to go to work for some stranger. Now, back to subsistence farming. Okay, yeah, I'll work for my own family. Cool. So how are you going to feed your family? Is you're going to have at least 5 acres of your own land, which you can't if you live in a city. You're going to have to go way out into the wilderness and do this. Okay, let's say you do that. You and everybody else is doing that too. How are you going to divvy that up? Do you know how many millions of people are in Denver alone? I mean, I don't even know. But I know that there's like 1 million people that live here, or something close to it. There's 350 million people in America alone, the United States. And then you've got 8 billion over the entire planet. How are you going to divvy up all the land and then give it out to 8 billion people? You're going to have to organize that. There's too many of us for it to just be like, well, you can go out and homestead. Well, what if there's 5 people that all want the same parcel of land and they fight over it? Okay, well, let's all love each other, as Jesus loved his disciples. Cool. That sounds really cool. So I'll go the extra mile and you can have this parcel of land. Great. Okay, so then that guy that walks the next limit runs into the same fucking problem at the very next parcel of land. And how do they know how far apart these are supposed to be? And how do they know how they're going to line up? They all have to build fences now, and then they're going to have to argue about that. And in the meantime, how are they all going to get fed while they're not working? And then On and on and on. So the point being, any description that we have is going to be necessarily imperfect, and it's going to have something to do with having to make this constraint, where it's like, I can't include everything. I can't include all people. I can't include every single possible outcome for this event. I can't include every single possible scenario in which this thing would happen. I can't include every single possible person that would ever be in this act. I can't include everything about those people that are doing the act. So there's these truncations, these assumptions that we make about people. And the more assumptions that we make, the worse, the further away that we get from perfection and from God and from the truth. Because we're having to make so many of these constraints that we just say something. And that's it. If you were to say the most broad, vague thing that you could think of, where it's describing literally everything, the only thing that you could say would be nothing. You would just sit there in silence. And that's the quote-unquote description of everything, is just silence. Because that's self-evident. Oh, now it's self-evident. So this is what I was getting at. It's like every single description that anybody could ever come up with is always going to be erroneous in some context, such that we don't ever get a full totality. So what the description has to do is it has to be big enough to include enough things that I'm not meticulously counting quarks in order to throw a baseball. I can just throw the baseball. I don't have to count the iota of a half of a penny. I can just count the whole, wage of the earner that's working. I don't have to figure out what brand of gin some wife beater is drinking in order to get him to quit beating his wife. There are limits to the details and the descriptions of what actually needs to be known. So the first constraint is it necessary to describe this thing in order to know what it is that I am asserting that I'm going to do with it, its purpose, its value, its predicted use. So every description that I come up with then is inextricably entailed with what I'm going to do with it, what its intended use is. And that's strange, because you would think you'd get the use from the description, but actually you get the description from the use. And that's counterintuitive. Most people think and operate in the world like, okay, I start off with, I describe this thing in this way because that's how it is to me. And because it has these descriptive qualities, then I use it. For example, a chair. Well, what is a chair? I describe a chair as that which I sit on. So there it is, right? A thing that I sit on. And it has this particular shape, right? It has the backing that supports my back, and it has armrests, and it has a projection that pushes it up from the floor, because the chair doesn't sit on the floor, it sits up above the floor. And so then that's part of it, and blah, blah, blah. But that's not a full description of everything that is a chair, because I could cobble together some wood and arrange it in that way, and it still really wouldn't be what most people would consider to be a chair. It would just be a random assortment of just random pieces. What is a car? It's something that you get inside and it goes fast. So I guess a plane is a car and a train is a car. And then it's like, no, it's a car is, it's got 4 doors. Okay, well then I guess then 2-door cars are not cars anymore, because it excludes those. And this is what I was getting at with the descriptions. It's like, which one is the right description? It depends on what you're using it for. So if we're trying to describe a car, we have to determine what is a car used for. Well, it's used to get from here to there. And what is the use of the description within the explanation that I'm giving to someone, or prediction, or definition of what this car is. So, like, I could say, if the purpose of it is this music video, that's a completely different purpose than an actual car that I'm driving, let's say to Seattle, to go see my ex-wife and her kid, that don't exist. It's just a hypothetical. But those are two completely different cars, are they not? Or at least they're two completely different uses of a car. In one instance, in the music video, the purpose of the car is just for entertainment purposes. It's just to get you a visual idea of it so that you feel like you're driving, which is a cool feeling of freedom. So then that's part of its use. Whereas it's almost the exact opposite. If I'm going to go see my ex-wife, that's kind of an obligation. I don't want to, but I have to so I can go see my kid or whatever it is. So in the description of the car, for entertainment purposes, because it's all visual, because it's part of a music video, then my description of that car is going to be visual. It's going to be, well, it's that thing in the center of the video, and it's got that little sporty flap thing on the back of it, and the 4 red lights, and it's going from side to side, and it's behind the sun, which is those 4 or 5 horizontal disc assembled strips. And the car is the thing that's on the road, and the road is the thing that's reflecting the sun, and the sun is the thing that's made of all those stripes and stuff like that. And it's all very visual because it's a music video car, and it's a description about that music video rather than it being a description about going to see my ex-wife. That car would be described as a very fast-moving vehicle that will get me there on time and get me home safely without destroying me on the way there. And I might describe it in terms of its utility in getting me to my ex-wife rather than its entertainment visual value. Even though I could drive that same car model, let's say this music video was of an actual car. I could take that actual car and describe it in 2 different ways, and it would be the same car. And the description would differ because of its use, given the scenario in which I'm describing it. So the description is actually embedded within a scenario before I even give it to you, because I can't infinitely go on and on and on about all the different attributes the car may or may not have. Those attributes are infinite. I could talk about its color, I could talk about its size, I could talk about its volume, I could talk about its interior, I could talk about its exterior, I could talk about the seat belts, I could talk about the chairs, I could talk about the upholstery on the chairs, I could talk about where I bought the upholstery for the chairs from. So all these things are infinite. There's an infinite number of these attributes. While a collection of those may be true, they may not be relevant. And if I give all these irrelevant things in there for every description, depending on the number of irrelevant things I'm including in each description, it starts to get very unwieldy very quickly. And at the very least, it's annoying. And inefficient. So the description is as much a description of the thing that it's describing as it is also a description of, or a reflection of, it being embedded within a particular scenario or its use or utility. So the description is only as good as it works well. It's pragmatic value of what it's used for. If I've described something accurately to you, then that means that whatever relevant thing that I find valuable has made it across to you. That the scenario that I am embedded within is similar enough to yours that we both value the same things about it, and we're both, going to use that or be in that scenario, and then we'll have that experience. And that's why the music video will apply to more people than the ex-wife scenario, because everybody can see this music video. Not everybody has an ex-wife. So the description of what a car is then is determined by the popularity or the audience that I'm describing it to. So now, not only is the description about whatever it is that I'm trying to describe, let's say a car, but then it's also describing the scenario within which that thing that's being described is used. So is the scenario of the car being used to go see my ex-wife, or is it to be used for a music video, or is it to be used for something else? And whatever that scenario is, that's also part of the description, And the audience that I'm describing it to also is part of that description, at least as far as constraining the infinite into a wieldy, finite description. So there's two measures to a definition, which would be the scenario within which it's being operating in, and the audience which is reading this description. And both of those things have to combine into one common world, I guess, within which that description applies. And it doesn't necessarily apply beyond that world. So there's a necessary limit of all of those descriptions.